Good morning, everyone. It's Thursday, April 8th, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kim Mo-kyun. Now, our top story today, the number of new COVID-19 cases in South Korea has reached 700 for the first time in 3 months. Health authorities are considering strengthening current prevention measures. Now, for more, we connect to our Choi Jang-yun at the News Center. Chang-yun, give us the details.
Mo-kyun, South Korea reported 700 cases on Thursday. This is the highest number recorded in more than 90 days since the country saw some 870 daily infections in early January. Among Thursday's cases, 674 were transmitted locally and 26 came from overseas. Most of the cases were concentrated in the capital region, with Seoul and the surrounding area reporting almost 500 new infections. Concerns over a possible fourth wave are rising as today's cases come after the country has been seeing 400 to 500 infections a day for the past week and more than 600 cases on Wednesday. Experts predict the daily cases could return to over 1,000 very soon. To curb the spread and roll out vaccines as planned, the government will announce adjusted prevention measures on Friday. The measures are expected to be strengthened as current infections are in the range of social distancing level 2.5, the second highest in the 5-tier system. Outside of the capital region, entertainment facilities such as bars and singing rooms could also see opening hours limited to 9 or 10 p.m. Such high numbers of cases could also affect the government's plan to vaccinate 20% of the population with the first dose in the first half of the year. That means having at least 10.4 million people vaccinated by June. As of Thursday, over 1,075,000 people have had their first shot, while more than 42,000 have had their second shot. Back to you, Mo-kyun.
Thank you. That was our Choi Jang-yun from the News Center. The European Medicines Agency says blood clotting should be listed as a very rare side effect of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Despite the shift in stance, it said the benefits of getting the shot outweigh the risks. Now, following the news, many countries are setting new guidelines regarding their use of the vaccine. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The European Medicines Agency announced on Wednesday that it had found a possible link between AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine and reports of blood clots in people who received the jabs.
The Prague, after a very in-depth analysis, has concluded that the reported cases of unusual blood clotting following vaccination with the AstraZeneca vaccine should be listed as possible side effects of the vaccine.
Despite the proof of blood clotting caused by the vaccine, the executive director of the EMA stressed that the vaccine has proved to be highly effective and is saving lives, reiterating the benefits outweigh the risks. However, some countries, including the UK, are making changes to their vaccine guidelines. The UK government on Wednesday is now recommending that people aged 18 to 29 be offered alternative jabs. According to the UK's Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization, those under the age of 30 should be offered either Pfizer or Moderna vaccines as an alternative, but has not advised against the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine for any other age groups. Belgium, on the other hand, has restricted the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine to those under the age of 55. The nation's health ministry said Wednesday that the suspension of the jab for adults aged 18 to 55 is based on recent scientific advice. Despite the recent announcement by the EMA, the WHO says based on current information, a causal relationship between AstraZeneca's vaccine and the occurrence of blood clotting is considered plausible but not confirmed. It added that specialized studies are needed to fully understand the possible link. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korean health authorities have temporarily postponed the AstraZeneca vaccination program for special education and daycare teachers, health teachers, as well as daycare center nurses, which were going to be ahead beginning today. The move comes as the European Medicines Agency is set to hold a meeting this week to review the possible correlation between the jabs and blood clots. Some 70,000 special education instructors and teachers at kindergarten, elementary, middle, and high schools were scheduled to receive their shots. The authorities say the vaccination has also been suspended temporarily for people under the age of 60. South Korea's main opposition, People Power Party, swept Wednesday's by-elections with a large margin. With this, the nation's two largest cities, Seoul and Busan, will now be headed by members from the opposition bloc. Our political correspondent, Lee Kyung-eun, has the story.
The new mayors of Seoul and Busan have been decided. The main opposition, People Power Party, swept to victories in both cities in Wednesday's by-elections. In Seoul, Oh Se-hoon of the PPP garnered 57.5% of the vote, easily beating the ruling DP's candidate Park Young-sun, who could only muster 39.2%. Oh, a former Seoul mayor, delivered his victory speech shortly after the exit poll results came out and some 10 years after he resigned from the position over that controversial free school meal plan.
The citizens of this city have tasked me with swiftly tackling urgent issues and to provide comfort to so many people suffering at this time.
In an earlier interview, the former Minister of SMEs and Startups, Park Young-sun, virtually accepted she was going to lose.
I accept whatever the results may be. I humbly take the punishment the Seoul citizens gave me to teach me a lesson.
In Busan, the PPP's Park Hyung-jun defeated his rival Kim Young-chun of the DP in an even bigger landslide than that of Oh Park at 62.7% to 34.4%. Kim accepted defeat ahead of the final results, which was followed by Park celebrating his victory. The new mayors will serve until June 2022. The April 7th by-elections, which come just before the final year of the Moon Jae-in administration, were largely seen as a litmus test of how the public feels about the government and could provide pointers for where next year's presidential race is headed. The high level of public attention was reflected in voter turnout. Some 58.2% of eligible voters in Seoul cast ballots, the third highest in the city's local election history. Turnout in Busan was 52.7%. Overall, early voter turnout also hit a record high of 20.5% last week. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
The United States says it will consider diplomacy with North Korea under conditions that the regime stays on the same page with Washington on denuclearization. The Pentagon has also reiterated that their final goal is the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Our Kim Da-mi reports.
The U.S. is prepared to consider diplomacy with North Korea if the North works toward denuclearization, reiterating the Biden administration stance. Speaking at a briefing on Wednesday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Washington has a clear objective as it relates to North Korea, which is denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. She also added the U.S. is continuing to enforce sanctions and consulting with its allies. But she declined to comment on reports this week about activity at a North Korean shipyard, which observers note could be a part of preparations for a summer-launched ballistic missile test. Also on Wednesday, the Pentagon further reaffirmed that the U.S. goal is still the denuclearization of North Korea. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said that the Biden administration is reviewing how to reach that goal and that it will be achieved through close discussions with Seoul. Kirby said this while highlighting the importance of South Korea-U.S. military exercises. He said that defense training in South Korea is crucial, stressing that the U.S. has to make sure that the alliance is sound and solid and ready to defend Washington's interests as well as Seoul's on any given day. When asked about diplomacy with North Korea, Kirby said the Biden administration is still in their review process. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
The latest IMF data shows that South Korea was ranked the world's 10th largest economy in 2020 despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Its GDP per capita also exceeded Italy for the very first time. The finance ministry is expecting the economic outlook for this year to recover to pre-pandemic levels as well. Our Choi Min-jung has more details.
South Korea's economy in 2020 ranked 10th in the world despite the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the Ministry of Economy and Finance on Wednesday, the country last year climbed up 2 ranks from 2019, surpassing Brazil and Russia. The top positions were once again held by the United States, China, Japan, and Germany. South Korea's GDP per capita last year also outpaced Italy for the very first time in 2020, reaching nearly $31,500. Citing International Monetary Fund's forecast for global GDP growth this year, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said South Korea is one of the strongest and fastest recovering countries among the world's largest economies. Among the G20 members, the IMF has projected that 8 countries, including South Korea, will recover to pre-pandemic GDP levels this year. Assuming that the country's GDP in 2019 was 100 points, this year the country's economy is expected to edge up by 2 notches to 102.6. The finance minister also added that South Korea showed the least negative economic growth among developed countries amid the pandemic. The IMF forecasted the world economy to rebound by 6% this year, following last year's negative growth of minus 3.3%. As for South Korea, the economy is expected to grow 3.6% this year, following minus 1% growth last year. Although South Korea's growth forecast is not as high as the global projection, it indicates that the country's economy posted relatively less negative growth compared to other economies. Hong also said the Biden administration's massive economic stimulus measures are expected to have a positive ripple effect on South Korea. With recent improvements in exports, production, and sentiment, Hong is optimistic the South Korean economy will exceed the levels reached in the fourth quarter of 2019. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
G20 countries have agreed to accelerate a global taxation overhaul, an issue that has been on the table for several years. Member states also reaffirmed the need to fight trade protectionism. Our Kim Hyo-san reports.
The G20 has agreed to work towards addressing the international taxation scheme by July amid growing global consensus following the pandemic. The G20 finance ministers and central bank governors held a virtual meeting Wednesday, during which they called for accelerating the process of achieving international taxation reform, an issue that has been under discussion for several years. The move comes after Washington this week made the case for an international base rate.
President Biden's proposals announced last week call for bold domestic action, including to raise the U.S. minimum tax rate and renewed international engagement, recognizing that it's important to work with other countries to end the pressures of tax competition and corporate tax base erosion. We're working with G20 nations to agree to a global minimum corporate tax rate that can stop the race to the bottom.
The discussions are focused on 2 pillars of global taxation. The first is aimed at addressing a fair allocation of profits among different countries where multinational companies operate, and the other being a global minimum effective tax rate. The joint statement also detailed the G20 countries' efforts to fight trade protectionism, a term that has been dropped since 2017 on former U.S. President Donald Trump's insistence. The G20 also reaffirmed the need not to ease stimulus measures too soon amid the pandemic. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
Good morning. After a chilly start, Thursday will be pleasant with plenty of sunshine. Morning temperatures were kicking off right around the season norms, still in the single digits for most parts of the country, 8 degrees in Gwangju and Gyeongju this morning. But temperatures will rise fast with sunshine hovering in the upper teens, but highs will be a few notches lower than yesterday. Seoul, Chuncheon and Gyeongju getting up to 18 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Air quality will be normal to good across the country. While much of the same is expected throughout the weekend with wide gaps in the readings expected, then there is rain in the forecast for early next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
That will do it for us at this hour on Arirang News. We'll be back with more of the day's headlines at noon Korea time, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
We use